Mega Man Legends brought with it a whole new take on the classic franchise, which left its side-scrolling roots behind for a much more open approach. While it lacked polish, the first outing was an enjoyable action RPG that performed well enough to warrant a sequel where many of the issues such as visuals and bad controls could be refined to offer an overall superior experience. For starters, the adventure isn't limited to a one-town island anymore, and instead spans a much more sizable chunk of the world that consists of several towns and remote areas to visit. Occupying these spaces are NPCs that will offer up quests for the player to undertake. These usually consist of visiting dungeons that are home to a wide selection of items that can aid you on your journey. The items you find in the dungeons will often need to be combined with something purchased from a shop or found around the town to create a helpful new special weapon or accessory that can really help you out. But the meat of the gameplay is still very similar to the first Mega Man Legends. As you play, you control Mega Man in the third person and adventure to different areas, all the while fighting enemies with your blaster. But this time around, you've got many more options when it comes to dispatching foes, from home-seeking missiles to more useful options like the drill amp that can be used to mine for rare goods. Now visually, Mega Man Legends 2 has always been one of my favourite games on the system. The bright, colourful, cartoon aesthetic fits the world perfectly and looks much cleaner when compared to the original. Environmental features like a fierce snowstorm and shimmering heat waves come together with small touches like lens flare and light produced from explosions to create something truly special. All in all, Mega Man Legends 2 fixes a lot of the flaws in the original and was a substantial improvement on the Legends formula. Capcom managed to turn what began as a mere spin-off into a worthy standalone franchise that sadly has all but been forgotten. Unlike the original Parasite Eve, the sequel's gameplay instead works out as more of a shooter than an RPG, but various elements are still included that would make it count as the latter, just not presented in a prominent fashion like the first game. It once again sees you taking up the fight as Aya as you deal with a new threat, and shares much in common with the likes of Resident Evil, but with a bit of a twist. You move for a few steps, go to an area with a different camera angle, shoot stuff with whatever weapon you have, and repeat. However, the game also adds something known as Parasite energies, pretty much RPG based magic that can do more than just damage enemies. You can use this to heal yourself or make your weapons stronger, and almost every one of these does something different to help you out. Now plenty of puzzles are scattered throughout the game, some tedious, some fun, but all challenging. Some of the more difficult ones may require you to do a bit of backtracking in order to solve them, or otherwise keep a sharp eye out for hints throughout the course of the game in order to solve. Graphically, Parasite Eve 2 is one of the most beautiful games ever developed for the PlayStation. Initially, it looks just like the Resident Evil games on account of its polygonal characters that move across pre-rendered backgrounds. However, the detail in the various settings make the static locations look especially realistic. Coloured ambient lighting, reflective glossy floors and glass surfaces, and other such elements all contribute to the game's surprising visual quality. A lot of people didn't like the original Parasite Eve, so Square decided to go with something a bit more traditional with the sequel, and wound up with a fine little game in the process. This is one you do not want to miss. From Software have gone on to become one of the most prolific developers in the industry, but not many people are aware of their earlier work, which began on the PlayStation 1. King's Field is essentially a first-person action RPG that sees the player filling the shoes of Alex, a young man washed up on a mysterious island who's only armed with his dagger and wits. After investigating the area, it soon becomes apparent that the island is under the control of an evil god, and can only be ridden of through the use of a powerful sword. When it comes to gameplay, admittedly, King's Field won't be for everyone. It's quite a slow experience, and those who prefer in-your-face action and have little patience will likely consider this game to be a complete waste of time. But for those like me who enjoy exploring expansive fantasy worlds, King's Field is a wonderful change of pace when compared to other PlayStation RPGs. You are given complete freedom to wander around the large island at will. The only things that hinder your exploration are enemies that are usually at a much higher level than you. The battle system is very simple. You use an equipped weapon to strike out at a monster, then move around waiting for your stamina gauge to recover so you can attack again. The magic attacks in the game range from very simple fire, wind, ice and healing spells to very impressive and destructive blasts, with some of the special weapons you can find in the game being used to cast a spell attack at the same moment you swing your blade. For sure, some will find the battles quite tedious, but it never spoils the enjoyment of exploring the island. If you're the type of player who has the patience to sit down and play a unique, slow-moving RPG with an incredible incredible atmosphere to lose yourself in, and I think you will really like Kingsfield. It may not offer as much as some of the other RPGs on this list, but for what it sets out to do, it more than achieves. If you see it in the wild for a decent price, it would make a welcome addition to your collection. Chocobo's Dungeon 2 took everything from the first game and managed to flesh it out into a much more digestible, but more importantly enjoyable adventure. The game starts with Chocobo and his friend Mog exploring a dungeon. Mog is a greedy little Moogle, eager to find treasure, while Chocobo is a much more cautious and more than a little concerned about fighting the various monsters they encounter. Eventually, one thing leads to another, and the two get separated, and when Chocobo awakens, he meets a human white mage named Shiroma. The two decide to work together to find Mog that sees them exploring dungeons, collecting treasure, and taking out enemies. All of these dungeons are randomly generated, and as a result, the game's replay value is potentially limitless because no two playthroughs will ever be the same. Now, as with any RPG, just as important as the minute-to-minute gameplay is customization, and Chocobo's Dungeon 2 takes it to the next level with its crafting system becoming a real highlight. It lets you fiddle around with various combinations and attempt to make your own weapons. With the amount of items to combine, possibilities are near endless, and with enemies having the ability to break your equipment, you'll be getting used to the pros and cons of each setup in no time, and likely land on something that suits your style of play best. Square was renowned for their visual prowess on the PlayStation 1, and while Chocobo's Dungeon 2 doesn't reach the same heights as some of the mainline titles, it definitely packs a punch. Each dungeon unfortunately almost looks the same, but with many nicely rendered background objects providing a bit of variety. It's really in combat where the game begins to shine, with some striking spell effects that can often fill the entire screen. Overall, the game is clearly geared towards a younger audience, but don't let it fool you, as there is plenty of depth and reward for long-time veterans of the genre to get stuck into as well. An RPG of epic proportions could barely be considered complete without an excellent cast of characters, and the second story does not disappoint. Right at the beginning, it gives you the choice of two characters to play as, known as Claude and Raina. Both of them are completely fleshed out with their own motivations and branching paths in the story, and depending on which one you choose will alter who you meet and what you learn throughout the game. This aspect alone promotes subsequent playthroughs, allowing you to see everything the game has to offer. Now, there's three main aspects to the game, with the first being the battles. It's a pure action-based system in a 3D field, allowing 4 characters in battle at a time. You only get to control one, but don't fear, as Second Story's AI system is surprisingly up to the task. You can customize the way your party members fight by changing their tactics, from going all out to playing it more strategically by assigning the use of only specific spells or attacks. It's a great little system that you'll likely tinker with for some time to get everything just the way you want. If you've played and liked the real-time battle system in the Tales series, chances are you'll love what's on offer here. You've got a string of basic attacks as well as special arts that up the ante with each and every encounter, and the freedom to move around the battlefield as you see fit really helps pull the player into each and every fight. Secondly, the skill system is pretty cool as well, and after every level up you gain skill points which can be used towards skills like cooking and alchemy that all have their role to play throughout the game, especially when it comes to creating unique items. And finally, private actions. The private actions you carry out when visiting each town help a lot when it comes to the overall game, because the storyline and ending changes depending on which ones you do or don't, again providing a reason to go through the journey several times. On the whole, if you like fast-paced and challenging battles, great music and deep gameplay, this is your game. Dragon Valor introduces player to Clovis, a young man who has just returned to his village to find it burning down. It's not long after this event that Clovis runs into a legendary warrior known as Dragon Valor, who has the ability to wield magical swords and slay dragons. As you would have guessed, a dragon was responsible for the destruction of the village, so he takes the warrior's sword and vows to get revenge. The best thing about Dragon Valor is how it seamlessly blends a mixture of genres together to create something quite unique. Imagine putting Streets of Rage, Luna, Crash Bandicoot and Zelda into a blender and hitting the button. and this would be the result, with the adventure taking place across an overworld map that holds many locations and surprises to uncover. The core of the game takes place from a side-scrolling view and presents a wide range of enemies for the player to take out. The further you progress, the harder the challenge you will face, but luckily there's an array of items that make the process all the more manageable. Dragon Valor provides you not only with a big sword and plenty of attacks, but also with an RPG-style inventory and status screen in which you can manage the magic and items that you've acquired. From strength to magic and defense, there's plenty of stats that offer up a noticeable difference out on the field, but in order to level them up, you won't be gaining experience points, but instead acquiring power-ups that serve to bolster your character's skill. Even new magic abilities are learned through fighting the game's many bosses that serve as the real stars of the show and offer the most friction when it comes to progressing. They're all intricately designed both visually and mechanically, requiring a real understanding of all the parts in play to overcome. Visually, Dragon Valor is not the best example of what the PS1 could do, but it does create an immersive world to explore. From rundown castles and mountain tops to the depths of the darkest dungeons, there's plenty around each corner that'll keep you engaged throughout your playtime. When it comes down to it, while some parts of it are lacking, the parts that aren't more than make up for it and provide an entertaining game, one which even a casual player can pick up and put down at ease. So if you're on the lookout for something new to jump into on the PS1, Dragon's Valor would make a great choice. Alundra is a game that wears its inspiration on its sleeves, with the most notable being Nintendo's Zelda. One thing in common is the traditional weapons such as swords, bombs, bows and arrows both tackle an evil force and go around the world looking for things to open up new locations. But the main difference is in the premise that sees you waking up after being shipwrecked on a distant land. After being saved by a local, you're quickly thrust into a struggle between the inhabitants of the land and a great evil that are keeping the townsfolk in a deep slumber. What makes it unique is that you dive into each of these NPC's dreams that act as its own dungeon with its own style, puzzles, theme and enemies. But Alundra is not confined to nocturnal puzzles and dangers. You must also navigate a fairly large overworld, which consists of towns, caves, dungeons and plenty of secrets to find. Now dungeons are a bit different than those in Zelda games though, with a huge emphasis on puzzle solving. I'm not talking about simple tasks like killing all the enemies to get a key or pushing a block to open a door. Some of these puzzles are brutally difficult and may actually turn some players away. Then, after enduring the challenges and pitfalls of each dungeon, you'll find that most bosses are far tougher and more durable than those in most Zelda games. I think this is one of the main reasons why the game never received the attention it deserved, due to many people simply getting stuck and giving up halfway through. It's definitely one of those games that doesn't hold your hand, but if you're up for the challenge, the reward is more than worth the struggle. Making your way to the end and interacting with the large amount of characters who each have their own story to tell is something unforgettable and totally worth doing. Although it might not be to everyone's tastes and it might be a bit too hard, I'd still recommend Alundra to any fan of old-fashioned action adventures. If there was one action RPG on the PlayStation 1 that never got the recognition it deserved, it has to be Brave Fencer Musashi. Musashi's adventure begins when he's summoned to another world by the inhabitants of All-You-Can-Eat Castle. The kingdom is in trouble due to the attacks of the Empire, and only the legendary Fencer can save the day. First off, the gameplay is really solid. It sees you having the ability to use two swords, known as Lumina and Fusion. Fusion is the first sword you get. It's a little sword which allows you to pull off multiple hit combos, but the main purpose of it is the ability to assimilate your opponent's special powers. Throughout the game, you'll need to use these skills that you acquire in order to progress, but can only hold one power in the sword at a time. These range from adding projectiles to your sword swing to regaining health, and even moves that protect you for short periods of time. On the other hand, Lumina is your big sword. You can only get one hit in with it, but it does serious damage and allows you to counter enemies, perform charged up moves that can clear the field in a flash. The combat is intuitive due to its simplicity, so the different skills and combos are a breeze to bust out. As you can see, platform jumping also plays a big part throughout the quest, and early in the game this can be a nuisance due to some tricky jumps, but once the always popular double jump is acquired, things are quickly smoothed over. One other aspect of Brave Fencer Musashi is the awesome boss battles, some of which give the memorable fights from Zelda a real run for their money. These battles, such as the fight with a massive dragon and the duel with a fire-wielding wooden statue stand out thanks to the great gameplay, memorable music, and Musashi's charming trash talk. If there is one huge negative I could place on the game though, it would have to be that it's just all over far too soon. You can easily beat it in one sitting, but thanks to a huge selection of side quests and optional collectibles, Musashi's runtime can be extended, giving a nice healthy bump to the replay value of the game. If you've never had the pleasure of playing this one back in the day, Brave Fencer Musashi is just as enjoyable today as it was then, and will no doubt please RPG veterans and newcomers alike. Vagrant Story is one of those games that many people will dislike based on complexity. Simply put, if you hated Final Fantasy VIII because it was just endless summoning of guardian forces, you'll likely hate Vagrant Story even more. Anyone who is willing to put the time in to actually learn how to play the game though will find it very rewarding. Battles are reminiscent of Parasite Eve, but unlike Parasite Eve, the weapons are swords, hammers and axes, so combat is an up close and personal affair. Press one button to bring out your weapon, and press that same button again to bring up a spherical grid. Anything within this grid is what you can attack, not only just the enemy, but separate parts of the enemy as well. Targeting the legs can limit movement, targeting the body can reduce the rate of missing an attack, and targeting an arm can limit the use of what that arm is holding. Finding out which parts to attack on certain enemies is the key to winning in the game. But that's not all, as Vagrant Story focuses heavily on weapon development and equipment setup. There is no direct leveling up in the game, but rather the key lies in combining and subsequently upgrading your equipment, and also the development of your weapons through constant use. Each weapon will have properties that rise or fall according to how you use them, such as its affinity towards certain types of monsters. If you haven't set up your equipment just right for the situation, you could find yourself doing very little damage and setting yourself up to fail. There is no getting around it, you will die a lot in this game. It's not afraid to challenge you, but if you take the time to get used to the intricacies of the mechanics in place, it'll all soon click with you. Now there's no chance I wasn't going to mention the incredible visuals that bring the world of Vagrant Story to life. Despite its drab colour palette, the scenery and setting is perfectly constructed for the mood and story of the game. It has one of the highest polygon counts of any PlayStation title, and its animations are outstandingly smooth and fluid, even down to the little touches like facial expressions on the characters. All things considered, I highly recommend Vagrant Story, especially to RPG fans and those who enjoy outstanding plots and challenging battles. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a direct sequel of the PC Engine classic Rondo of Blood, and the game even begins where that one left off. After a quick battle with Dracula and a huge time jump, the son of Dracula, Alucard, decides to infiltrate Castlevania to finally put an end to his bloodline once and for all. Gameplay wise, it's simply astounding. It took what was great about Rondo of Blood and made it 10 times better. Now, instead of just having some multiple paths or secret areas, the entire game is one huge non-linear map. There's no route you have to follow. There is no order to the bosses which you can fight. You are free to go where you please and take it all at your own pace. Of course, Alucard can't access everything at once though. The majority of the areas are blocked off with unreachable ledges, sealed doors, spiked floors and other hindrances. In order to progress, you come across different items and relics to unlock further abilities such as double jumping that make reaching these areas possible. Now when it comes to fighting, Alucard is as responsive and as fluid as you would expect, with a series of weapons becoming available over the course of the game to down each and every threat you run into. You'll find the weapon, the shield, cloak, ring or any other trinket that best suits your needs and learn to use the spells, enchantments and curses at your disposal to become a real force to be reckoned with. Alucard's impressive arsenal isn't the only reason why Symphony of the Night is so enjoyable though. Not only can you equip a range of armor and accessories to boost your stats, you also gain experience points by defeating the monsters. This allows you to grow Alucard over time and invest in the various attributes available. On the whole, it all comes together to create one of the most deepest games you'll find on the PS1, and one that you'll find incredibly hard to put down. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about the next upload, as well as follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date. You can also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters as well: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Alex, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.